Step right up, ladies and gentlemen, and genders of all ranges, and welcome to the ARTPIT, conducted by the Jeremys, a pair of purveyors of fine art and oddities via the best damned art gallery this side of Long Beach, the Dark Art Emporium. Listen and wonder as we jibber-jabber about all things art, music, movies, and whatever other jive we decide to mosh together. Faint of heart, beware, and welcome to the ARTPIT. We're here. You're here. Thanks for being here. How's everybody doing?
Yeah,
Are you ready, kids?
Round two.
Round two. Yeah, episode 2. And we're not going to have an artist per se on today. Not a traditional artist like we usually have on our walls, but one that we've often had in the gallery. So I guess that counts for something. Today we're going to be welcoming Laura, who is an embalmer and mortician. We're going to talk a little bit about what she does and the artistry of her trade and how it has evolved and changed and since the days of the COVID-19 crisis. But we're going to dig into some of the nitty and gritty as well, some of the grody and toady, and find out exactly what she does in the depths and the bowels of a cemetery's mortuary. Laura, how are you?
I'm okay.
Yeah?
I'm holding up. Not dead yet.
Well, that's a good start. It's a step above a lot right now, unfortunately. So that's good to hear. Shot, how you doing?
I'm okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm hanging in there.
Above ground.
God damn it,
Laura hasn't
fucking morbid.
Laura hasn't gotten to me yet.
She'd make you look better.
I'm sure.
Like it's not really a
Yeah.
it'd
All
be
the
pretty
wrinkles
easy.
on my forehead would be gone after
Right,
Laura
right.
sculpted my face.
Can pop them out.
Yeah.
Do some feature builder injections.
Oh, see, that's where we're headed. All right, Laura. So you were an embalmer and mortician?
So, okay, getting into all of the jargon, whatnot. So I am a licensed funeral director in the state of California. I'm also an embalmer. So people tend to use the term mortician as just an umbrella term that encompasses anybody that really works in dealing with the preparation of the dead.
What do you call it? Funerary arts?
Restorative art is typically the term
All
that's
right.
used.
I like the sound of funerary arts, though. It sounds nice.
I mean, that old-timey. So specifically, I'm an embalmer. That's my focus. So while I can meet with families and direct funerals, I choose to stay away from the living, and I stay in the basement of the mortuary with all of the decedents.
Yeah, less people to argue with.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would imagine. So we are recording right now in the Dark Art Emporium, and this is your first time in here. In the new space.
It's the first time since you moved.
Yeah.
Because she's definitely spent plenty of time with us at the previous location, actually both of the previous locations. Some of you who have been to any of our openings may remember Laura. She's often the one slinging beers and wine.
I am the strange woman in the back with an urn for a tip jar, saying that if you fear change, leave it there. Most people like it. I mean, most of the crowd that shows up to these art shows likes it.
I like the matchbooks that you have out for the giveaway. What's the thing? What was on the matchbooks?
The prior mortuary I used to work for, I convinced my boss to make matchbooks that on the back say, we don't mind if you smoke. And then on the front it said the mortuary's name and everything. I still have quite a few of those.
Yeah, you should bring some. We should just have a little bowl of those here.
Yeah.
It's our humor for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
It aligns.
Yeah. I mean, Laura's been with the gallery since we opened. She lived above the first 2 locations.
Yeah, essentially lived in the same building.
Yeah.
I remember I moved into that building about 2 months prior to the art gallery opening. And my uncle came up from Upland, and him and I were walking down the street to the bistro to get some lunch. and he saw your little, like, shoddily written out sign that you had in the window that said dark art coming soon. And he just looks at that and he goes, I guess you moved into the right building.
Yeah.
And I remember the beginning. It's weird to think about it now that I'm at this point with you, where I remember I'm like, I want to go talk to him because he's into weird shit. And then I would try to like go down there and I'd be like, but I'm socially awkward. I don't know how to start a conversation with people. I've worked with dead people for so long. So
We became fast friends.
But we're
pretty
dead
quick.
inside, so
exactly.
it's perfect.
I just inserted myself into the business. I just kept showing up every single day with my dog, bothering Jeremy until he just finally let me do something.
Yeah.
And honestly, we let you do that because we love Freya.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean, I tell my boyfriend that all the time. I'm like, let's get real. You're only in this relationship because you love my dog.
Yeah.
Like, I asked him if he wanted to come and just like hang out and watch just to get out of the apartment because he's not fortunate like me. He doesn't have technically an essential job where he can leave 3 days out of the week to get away from me.
And let's face it, Freya's humped us all way more than
Oh
you
yeah,
have.
oh yeah. He won't. See, that's the thing. He won't let Freya hump him.
Yeah.
I'm like, come on, dude, just give it up.
Yeah,
You gotta give it
Yeah,
up.
that dog humps really well.
Do you want the love or no? Like,
He takes the feet licking, so he's into
Oh.
the foot stuff that she gives.
I've never gotten them.
I feel like I know
Well, see,
him
because you're
so
always
much better
wearing
now.
shoes.
Yeah.
If you take those shoes off,
I
she'll
know.
lick those
Next
feet.
time.
That is so foul. I do not. I can't. Just picturing that makes me nauseous. It really does.
Well, see, what's great too is she just recently discovered turtles. So I'm staying
Wait,
at my.
what does that mean? How did you discover turtles?
So I'm staying at my boyfriend's apartment through all of this, and he lives in one of those complexes that has tried to make it upper scale. So they have this section with a koi pond, and they have red-eared sliders and koi fish, and they have a snowy egret that hangs out there. And so I take Freya over there once or twice a day just for us to get out of the house. And at first she didn't notice the turtles because they blended in so well with the rocks, and then she realized what they were, and she's obsessed with trying to sniff their butts. And it was really cute because the other day there was one in the water kind of hanging around the edge, and she just did this slow paw at it, thinking that like I didn't notice it and that the turtle wouldn't notice it either.
I mean, to be fair, who doesn't like a rock with a dick? You know, like that's a turtle, right? Like it's a rock with a dick that comes out the front of it.
Okay.
Have you seen a turtle? It looks
Yeah,
like
well,
a rock with a sudden dick.
Yeah.
The head comes out and
All right.
I love how their back, I love how their back legs look like they were ran over by a semi because they're just flat. They're flat fins meant for swimming in the water, so it looks like a car drove over them. That's what I think of every
see,
time.
that's not weirder than thinking it's a rock with a dick.
Okay,
I'm sorry,
okay.
Dick, I'm sorry. All right. So she loves turtles. We love Freya.
Yeah.
So let's see. I do have a list of questions I'm going to refer to occasionally when things get awkward like this. And we might edit this part out because that would be smart. But-
Whatever.
Just let it roll, man.
Right?
Yeah.
Just let it rip. All right. So I guess there's understandably a lot of confusion when it comes to mortuary jobs and the titles involved because unless you've seen like 6 Feet Under, which, you know,
Which was actually pretty well researched, and shout out to Cypress College. That's
genius
where
show.
Federico, the embalmer in 6 Feet Under went. Yeah, they really did their research. I mean, that's granted the show is more about like the dynamics of the family.
Oh, sure. It's the
than it is
backdrop.
about the actual business, but the little bit of the business that they have sprinkled in there is pretty accurate of what it's like to work in a family-owned funeral home.
So give me the breakdown. So I'm a dead body.
I a dead body.
I is
By Apple?
I is
I
dead
dead?
body. Yeah, I did.
A dead body.
And my family has contacted you. From that moment, who are they talking to, and where do I end up in whose hands before I'm either on fire or in the ground?
On fire. Segue, sidebar. I saw a meme the other day that said, apparently I'm not supposed to ask the family smoking or non-smoking, and it's like a funeral director. I thought that was hilarious.
It's adorable.
I'm like, and this is why they don't let me meet with families, because that sort of stuff would come out of my mouth. Some people find it charming, others do not.
All right, so I'm dead. My
You're
family's
dead.
contacted you.
Yes.
Who are they talking to when they call? And then, like, from there, like, just give me the breakdown of the process of what's going to happen to me and whose hands I'm
Oh,
in.
wow. I mean, first off, it's all going to depend on the circumstances regarding how you died. I mean, if you don't have
Tiger mauling.
Tiger Molly?
Tiger mauling. I was mauled to death by a tiger.
I thought that was a new street drug.
Tiger
Okay,
Molly?
Is it Tiger Molly?
Dude, I do so much tiger mauling.
Oh man, you just start hallucinating and seeing like Exotic Joe everywhere, and like Lisa Frank.
You just think you're Exotic Joe. You're like, God damn you, Carol! That sounds like a
man.
really shitty trip, but anyway, go ahead.
Tiger mauling, is that seriously the scenario we're going with?
Okay,
Because I
sure.
could break it down.
All right, yeah, sure. Let's say that I'm pretty fucked up. Like, my body's gonna need some help.
Okay, well, I'll give you the average. So let's say that you're someone that's been a lifelong type 2 diabetic. So if that's the case, you obviously have a doctor that you're seeing regularly, or at least one would think. You know, it is the United States. Unfortunately, we have some problems going on right now. So just for the sake of this scenario, you have a doctor. You're going to see that doctor regularly. That doctor knows that you're not in the best of health. So when you do die, you don't have to become a coroner's case, or you don't have to go to the medical examiner's office. People go to the medical examiner's office because they died either in a suspicious way, or they didn't have a primary care physician to attest or sign the death certificate. So
Tiger mauling's pretty suspicious, I'm just saying.
yes, if you were tiger mauling, depending on where you died and which county you died, that county's coroner or medical examiner would take custody of your body first. It would not come to a mortuary.
Unless you're in Florida.
Unless you're in Florida, yeah.
Then it's usual, like,
A
that's
gator
just
mauling,
how people
yeah.
die is tigers. And
Okay.
I feel like one of the-
sidebar. I saw a video the other day of a 7-foot gator crawling a fence.
Oh, I saw that. Yeah, that was awesome.
And it was terrifying. I'm like, those fuckers could crawl over fences? They could climb? Like, this was news to me. I'm so much more scared of them now. Anyway, go ahead.
was-
So
many years old.
Right.
I follow this Instagram page called Nature is Metal, and they posted a video the other day where it was a dog sliding into a gator pit, and it was the most terrifying thing I've ever seen in
Please
my
tell me
life.
the dog was okay?
Unfortunately, no.
God damn it.
Was
Yeah.
about to follow that Instagram and not anymore.
I am not.
You know, some of
I
the stuff
wanna
they,
go
I mean,
near
most
that.
of the stuff they post is just nature in the wild, but every once in a while
I mean,
they
that's
post,
nature. It's just not the fun
Yeah.
Disney documentary part of it.
Yeah, but when you put a domesticated dog into the picture, and I love how Instagram doesn't bother to censor any of their stuff, but that video they did, where you had to click something to be able to get to
Yeah.
the video. It was like, hey, just to let you know, this is kind of fucked up. And me being me, it just piqued my curiosity, and I'm like, I'm clicking on it, and then I watched it, and I'm like, why did I click on
Yeah,
this?
that's
All right,
terrible.
so the medical examiner.
The medical examiner, yes. Let's get back on track. So in that instance, what would happen is your attending physician, or say you were on hospice, the hospice nurse, your death would basically be called by some medical attendant. And at that point, your family would be instructed to contact a mortuary. And that's when you call me. When you call me, we refer to that as a death call, and that is when you inform the mortuary of your choosing that someone has passed away. We collect various statistics from you, such as where are they, what time did they die, what is their name, how big are they, are we gonna have to carry their fat ass down some stairs? And then we dispatch, you're just gonna have to get used to that. And then we
Don't fat shame the dead.
I just gotta tell you, when you've worked by yourself trying to maneuver a 600-pound dead body, you start to hate people that let themselves get to that point
God
a little
damn it.
bit. I have serious back problems now because of it. And I actually got in trouble at one of my jobs because I made a comment and I said, do your mortician a favor and lose some weight.
Oh, that should be a t-shirt. I mean, it's horrible, but I love it.
It is. And I mean, that's one thing about being a mortician, and I stand by this, is that if you're going to go into death care in any aspect, whether it be an embalmer, a funeral director, a hospice worker, a medical examiner, an autopsy tech, you gotta have a good sense of humor. Like, if you can't see the humor in what you're dealing with, like, this job will eat you alive.
I can imagine it's like any other potentially traumatizing job, whether it be, military, police, fire, mortician, embalmer. Like, if you don't have a morbid sense of humor about it, like, there's just no way for your brain to process that properly, right? Like, or in a healthy way. I mean,
exactly. And
you're
I
gonna end
always,
up dragged down by it.
and they say, like, actions versus words. It's like, if I truly hated these people or hated what I do for a living, I mean, I wouldn't wake up at 4:30 in the morning to go into work at 6 a.m. every single day and work a 12-hour shift and help these families and, like, fight with my coworkers when they're trying to be lazy pieces of shit and not doing what's best for the family. Like,
I hope they're listening. I hope they're listening and learn.
We care about these people, even though we don't know them. But the benefit of me not having an emotional relationship with the decedent is, I can do my job.
Decedent?
Decedent.
Is that a technical term?
I mean, I worked for one mortuary.
It's not deceased?
Decedent is one of the words we use. There's a whole slew of jargon that we use. The only reason I say decedent is because I, for many years, worked for one company where my boss did not like that we called the decedents cases. He thought it was dehumanizing. And so anytime you would say case, I have a case to work on, I have to get this case ready for their funeral, he would yell at us and tell us that decedent was the appropriate word. And so now I always say decedent.
I've never heard that word in my life before. That's cool.
Decedent. So anyways, going back to the scenario,
yes,
you die.
Now that the decedent.
So you've contacted the mortuary at this point, and we dispatch someone to the location of the decedent, whether it be at a hospital morgue or at their home, and we pick them up and we bring them back into our care, at which point, depending on what time of day it is, we have a funeral director that will then reach out to the person with the right of disposition, not the next of kin. That's something that is very important to specify, because people often think that because they're next of kin, they have the right to disposition, and that's not always the case.
Is that a legal thing? Like,
yes.
So if you don't have somebody, what'd you call it again?
A person with a right to disposition?
Yeah, the person with the right to. So if I don't have that, I don't actually have somebody who has the right to say?
I mean, everybody has one of those as default in some way, shape, or form.
Who is that person?
Like, if you're not married.
So by law, it's called the table of consanguinity. So there's a pecking order to it. So first and foremost, if you have a healthcare directive or someone that has a durable power of attorney for healthcare, they are the person that will oversee everything. They supersede spouses, domestic partnerships, children. So, I mean, you guys could go out and make some friend that you knew in kindergarten your healthcare directive.
That would be so
person,
fucked up.
I kind of want to do that.
Tell your girlfriend and your wife, like, go fuck yourself. And basically, like, your wife
No, my high school girlfriend. I want to give it to my high school
exactly.
girlfriend.
Give it to your high school
Just
girlfriend.
out of nowhere, she gets this information.
And so basically screw your wife over and just be like, look, my high school girlfriend has the say. She knows what I want to happen. At that point, it then goes down to the spouse or registered domestic partner. If you have none, it then goes to your children. Now, this is another specification, because if you have multiple children, some children, because they're the eldest, think that they have the most say.
I would assume that the eldest was.
That is not legally how it works. So your children, so in my family, I'm one of 3. We are all adults. So as long as the children are of the age of majority, so they are above the age of 18 in the state of California, their say is all equal. So we have to actually get a majority of them to agree on funeral services in order to proceed.
They have to vote.
They basically have to vote, yeah.
Holy shit.
They have to vote on, are we smoking or non-smoking grandma or mom? And then from there, if you have no children, it goes to your parents, if your parents are still alive. And then at that point, it goes to like
Uncle
siblings.
Joe or...
And if you are the person that has the right to disposition and it falls on you in the state of California, you do have the right to waive it and give it to the next person. And that happens oftentimes, especially with elderly couples. You know, if the spouse dies and the wife is like 80 years old and just isn't in the right frame of mind or physically not okay to deal with that, she can legally pass it on to her children.
Now, if you have the right and you decide to pass it on, do you get to pick who that person is that gets to make the decisions? Or is it just the next person in queue?
It's always just been the next person in queue, but I would imagine that you would have the right to say, I mean, don't quote me on any of this.
Yeah.
This is where like the law gets a little fuzzy.
I mean,
for
this is
me.
pretty intricate detail, but like,
Yeah.
like you couldn't just say, hey, see that homeless guy across the street? Like, he gets to make the decisions now.
Yeah, that typically doesn't happen.
Yeah, well,
Usually
of
what
course,
happens
but-
is mom is not doing so well. She's elderly. We're worried for her health. We're going to take it over, aka the children are going to take it over. And that's usually what occurs in the natural order of things. The children would be next anyways. So I'm not really sure if the person that has the right to disposition has the right to assign the task to someone else, or if it just naturally falls to the next person in the pecking order.
All right, so the kids have decided, they held the vote, and they've decided that they are going to have the body prepped for viewing and burial.
Okay.
What now?
So at that point, what your funeral director does is sits down with you for about an hour and they get you to sign all of these documents. And once you sign these documents, they begin to go to different places. So me working in preparations as an embalmer, we would receive an embalming authorization and we would proceed to embalm as soon as possible.
And not everybody gets embalmed, right?
Not everyone gets embalmed, no.
But do people get embalmed if they're going to get burned?
Sometimes, yeah. Absolutely.
all right.
Why?
I mean, I specifically work for a black mortuary. Now, this is one thing that was even surprising to me going into the funeral industry is how segregated funerals are. People tend to stay with their own race, their own culture when it comes to funerals. There's not a lot of like overlap. So if you're Jewish, you're going to a Jewish funeral home. If you're black, you're going to a black-owned funeral home. If you're Mormon, you're going to whatever funeral home in the area has the Latter-day Saints account. So I work for a mortuary that primarily deals with the black community and African Americans. And so in their culture, they're Baptists, and it's very important to them to be able to still view the decedent. So we still go through the process of embalming, cosmetics, hairstyling, dressing, casketing. We do the full pomp and circumstance of a full day viewing followed by a morning or afternoon funeral service and a burial. Or if they're being cremated, at which point they would go back to preparations. We would remove them from the casket and then they would go to the crematory. So just because you're being cremated doesn't mean you're not going to be embalmed.
All right.
Which that's another misconception.
That's really weird. I just like that's bizarre as hell to me. But okay.
I guess
All
you
right.
want to be embalmed if you're going to be viewed.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
right?
yeah, you don't want to stink.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in the state of California, it is illegal to tell a family that embalming is required by law because it's not. However, and this is where it gets a little hairy, and most people don't understand, is that funeral homes are allowed to make stipulations of what they are allowed to do. Because at the ending of the day, we are working adjacent to public health. I mean,
Yeah.
you can see with COVID-19, we're working with individuals that are potentially contagious. You could potentially catch something from a dead body. And there are funeral directors out there and on the internet that will tell you that dead bodies aren't dangerous. They totally can be.
I can't imagine that there's a way that you could say that with a straight face, because a lot of stuff can live on a dead body.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, there's really scary things like CJD, which is
The fuck is
essentially
that?
mad cow disease. It's 100% fatal. If you catch it, you're going to die. Think of it as an accelerated form of Alzheimer's, where you just have this prion that gets into your brain and starts eating away at your
I
brain
remember when that
rapidly.
was a thing.
Oh,
It
yeah.
started over in England, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I remember that.
I was actually reading something that said that they think that there's going to be another massive outbreak of it because it can lie dormant for a few decades. And they think that anyone that potentially consumed that meat back in the 90s when that was occurring could have that prion lying dormant in their body, and it can just reactivate in like 20, 30 years and boom, we have another massive outbreak of a disease that's just going to take people out.
Well, that sounds fun. So anyway,
Well, and it's interesting because my roommate's British. He's from Canterbury, and he told me that that's actually one of the reasons why he can't donate blood. That every
Shout
time
out to
he tries,
Hunter.
that anytime he tries to go donate blood, they ask him if he lived in England during that period of time, and when he tells them yes, they say no, we don't want your blood.
Wow.
Yeah.
all right.
So at which point, yes, going back to the funeral
So
arrangements.
we're and I love that this keeps tangenting because we're covering so much awesome territory that
You know,
I
my
would
job-
not even have thought about. But
My job alone could be a podcast by itself. There's so many different aspects, and we live in a society that is in such denial that this is going to happen to them.
oh, we're completely insulated from the death experience
Oh, yeah.
here.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I am so much a proponent to people taking on as much as they're comfortable with when it comes to a funeral. By all means, come in and do grandma's hair or paint her nails or put her makeup on. I mean, legally, if you're next of kin, you have every right to be in the embalming room with me when I embalm. You can legally be in the room with me and watch me embalm if you're the person with the right to disposition or you're the spouse. The only stipulation would be I can't have any other decedents in the room. You can't be able to view anybody else's.
So you can't have like a big party in there.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, so
too.
basically,
I was like,
I mean,
embalming party. That's in my will now. Like embalming
Obviously-
parties in my will.
it's obviously something that we don't push or advertise
Well,
because,
yeah.
I mean, we work in rooms that have 2, 3 tables, and so that multiple embalmers can be working at one time. And if we allowed a family member to come in and view the embalming, it means that essentially operations kind of shuts down for the
Yeah.
day. And when you work in a care center that's as busy as mine, we can't afford for that to happen. But it's an option out there for people. I mean,
That's crazy.
If
That's
you
good
can
to know.
stomach it.
All right, so the body is now. I am now in. I've been transported.
Okay.
I am in the mortuary.
You've met with a director. You've signed all the documents.
All the paperwork's complete. We are going. I look like shit. I've been mauled by a fucking tiger.
Okay.
You're gonna have to work on me because people want to see me before I get put in the ground.
Okay.
So what's next?
I mean, if you were mauled by a tiger, this is going back to the coroner situation. So you're probably autopsied, maybe.
Right. So I got the pretty Y.
You have the Y incision.
Yeah.
You probably have a cranial incision as well.
Oh, that's a thing
Yeah,
too. I didn't
yeah.
know that.
That's another. So this is one of my favorite things to do. I like to watch CSI and stuff, and then like laugh at their incisions. I'm like, huh, that's not how you make a Y incision.
What a shitty incision.
What a shitty incision. That's not realistic at all. That's not how a baseball suture looks.
So what's the cranial thing? What's that all about?
Oh, so majority of the time when you go to get an autopsy, so there's multiple forms of autopsies. So you can get a thoracic autopsy where it's just the thoracic cavity,
The chest.
the chest cavity.
Yeah.
You can get an abdominal cavity, an abdominal autopsy. Most of the time, if they're going to do one, they'll do the other. That's why you see that long Y incision.
Right.
But there are times where people come in and they just have their, sternum cracked, and they just looked at like the heart and the lungs, and that was about it. Their cranial.
I imagine that they probably have a pretty good idea going in what the issue was.
Possibly,
So they don't.
yeah.
Why go into areas that they don't need to go into, right?
I mean, yeah, so it depends on the medical examiner's office. So Los Angeles County is the biggest and busiest medical examiner's office, I would say, in the world.
In the world.
In the world. They deal with so much. So a lot of times, if it's very obvious of how you died, they won't do extra stuff.
Yeah, they're not fucking with it.
But in Orange County, at their medical examiner's office, I remember this because when I was going through school to get my degree in mortuary science, we had to go watch autopsies being performed at the Orange County medical examiners. And they said, if you come through our doors, you're getting a full post, a full autopsy, which means you're getting thoracic, abdominal, and cranial.
Yeah, rich white people don't care.
Yeah. But the worst of all is when they do a spinal autopsy, because it's just awkward. It's really awkward
You gotta
having.
cut somebody's back open.
Oh yeah, they'll cut open down the spine and they'll open you up and look at the spine.
So what are they looking for there?
Possibly breaks, fractures.
Oh, like a broken back.
Yeah, things like that.
But you didn't explain the head one though.
So cranial autopsy is pretty common. If you go to the medical examiners and they perform an autopsy, you're typically getting a cranial autopsy. So they just They make an incision in the back of your head, behind your ears, and they just pull your...
Deglove your head.
Deglove. I'm trying to think of the technical term. Reflect. They like reflect your scalp.
Okay. I know deglove is something else. I just like the word.
Deglove is something else that's
we'll talk about that in a minute.
A lot more gross. And so they then proceed to saw your calvarium off, and then that way they can have access to your brain. They take your brain out and they do what they need to do, take tissue samples, and then at which point your brain goes into your abdomen.
See, I've heard
afterwards. So if you've had a cranial
in a bag,
autopsy,
right?
Yeah.
All your shit goes into a bag and then stuffed back inside you.
Yes. We call it the menudo bag.
The menudo bag.
The menudo bag. So yeah, all of your visceral organs after. So they dissect them one by one, and they take fluid samples and tissue samples, and then afterwards, like, they are legally not allowed to keep them, so they have to put them back into a bag, typically a biohazard bag, and they just kind of tie it up and they set it into your abdomen and and they kind of loosely suture you back up. And then when you get to the mortuary, if you are going to be embalmed, that's the point where I would open you back up. And I would take out all of your organs, and I would have to preserve them outside of your body because obviously they're no longer attached to your vascular system. It's been disrupted by all of the incisions and the cutting. And you become what's called a 6-point injection, where we have to inject each limb of your body separately. We treat all of your visceral organs outside of your body, and then when we are done, we put them back in. And we suture you up very tight so that nothing leaks out.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, speaking of leaks.
Uh-oh. Where's this going?
I mean, I know that there's a lot of myths and things around leaks and things that stop leaks and things like that. Like, I've seen pictures of screw-in butt plugs and...
That's an AV plug, yeah. That is a real thing.
Yeah.
Most embalmers do not use them, though.
So why don't they use them? Like, you just let them leak out their ass?
So it's somewhat of a myth that everybody shits themselves when they die.
Okay, but if they
That
do,
was my
who
next
cleans it
question.
up?
Where's the poop go?
Yeah, no, South Park, I'm sorry, you got it wrong. Not everybody, and thankfully, not everybody shits themselves
Right?
when they die.
Imagine that would not be fun for you.
Yeah. Typically, in the event, if you do get a shitter that just won't stop, an AV plug is something that you can utilize to plug it up. You basically screw it into the anus. Yeah. That's why it's AV stands for anal vaginal. So
they go other
it can
places.
also go in the front. Yep.
Whoa.
It can go in the front butt too.
So what's coming out the front?
Sometimes
There's no shit coming out of there, right?
Sometimes ladies leak, and there are instances where women give birth and then they get holes that go through their membrane right there. So they're essentially their birth canal and their get connected. That's a real thing.
Oh man.
Look it up. Yeah, I
don't want to look that up.
Yeah, it's
Nobody
it's
wants
pretty,
to look that up.
It's pretty terrifying, and it's probably one of the reasons I don't ever want to have kids. Besides, the financial responsibility
And children.
and children, right?
I've heard of postmortem birth though, but that's a different thing entirely.
That's a story for later, but I got a good one. Maybe when we get to your later questions, we can dip into that one. That was probably one of the strangest things in my.
Ooh, we're teasing now. We're teasing. So so
Now you have to keep
okay.
listening.
So my anal vaginal plugs are in.
But let me specify with that. So I've been an embalmer I've been in the industry now for over 10 years. I started in the industry back in the summer of 2009, 2010. It's been 10 years now. I've never used one of those. Ever. One of the arguments embalmers make is that when you insert that, it actually loosens the muscles and makes the problem worse. So we typically just utilize diapers.
Oh.
Yeah. So I just put diapers.
I almost said no shit.
We utilize diapers. I've also sutured some buttholes. So that's,
That was so going to be my next question.
So
if you just
I
sew 'em up.
suture. Sometimes I do just suture them shut because I feel like it's a better method.
What a day!
But it has to be pretty bad for me to take that step.
So is it just shit that's coming out of there, or like if somebody's been around for a while post-mortem, they've been sitting for a bit, like are they just leaking out of everything?
I mean, not always.
Okay.
It all depends on various things. It also can start leaking after embalming. So sometimes after we do what's called cavity injection, it can open some things up, and so sometimes formaldehyde will leak out.
Oh,
So it's not just shit.
I mean, you're adding more liquid to something that's liquefying, so
Yeah.
it makes sense.
Yeah.
All right, so you got me all fixed up. All right, as far as the embalming and my ass goes, nothing's leaking out, but I still look like shit.
Okay.
What's next?
So what's next is if you have any sort of issues, we would employ what's called restorative art, which can vary. It typically involves wax. We can utilize plaster of Paris. We can also do typical, there's restorative sutures that we can use where they're sutures that are meant to be hidden, and they typically lie flush with the body so that you can easily wax over them. This is also something that we would already be working on while we're embalming.
Oh, it's
depending on
simultaneous.
so it's something, it depends on the level of restorative art that's required.
Well, give me an example of, let's say,
I've had my head beaten in with a fire extinguisher.
Okay, so you have a crushed skull at this point,
Yes.
so you were probably autopsied.
Yes.
Because your brain no longer inhabits your skull.
Yeah, it's in
When
my
we're
belly now.
embalming you, when we're done embalming, and we're gonna go to suture your cranium.
hold on a second. Why a fire extinguisher? What
It's
did
that-
you do?
It's in that movie, that French movie Casper Noé made, Irreversible. It starts with a guy just beating this guy's face with a fire
With a fire
extinguisher.
extinguisher?
And it's just disgusting.
Like, is it just like a bowl when he's done?
Yeah, it's just mold.
Like, you just tell people no, right?
I mean, most of the time, because it all does depend on the mortuary and it depends on the type of embalmer that they employ. I've met a lot of embalmers in my career that just really don't give a shit about the artistic aspect of it. But me, on the other hand, I went in specifically wanting to learn how to do these things.
Well, you were a sculptor, right?
I was a sculptor, so when I first entered college, I had an interest in ceramics. I spent probably about 8 to 9 hours a day just sculpting using clay. But being a rational person, I didn't think that I could ever make a life out of art, so I wanted to make sure that
Hey, you're smarter than the rest of us.
So I wanted to make sure that I had skills that could be utilized to make money, so I'm not poor all the time. And I just so happened to wind up at Cypress College, which is one of 2 colleges in the state of California that offers a degree in mortuary science. And after being there for a couple of semesters and people getting to know me, I had a lot of faculty coming to me telling me that maybe I should go to a workshop for the program to see if it's something that I would like. So I
They're
ended
like,
up,
you're a fucked up person.
Yeah, pretty much.
You like
They were
fucked
like,
up shit.
They were like, you're morbidly curious, you're
Yeah.
really interested in this stuff. And so I went to one of the workshops for the program, and they talked about how it's a great stepping stone. So if you'd ever like to cross over into the medical examiner's office, many autopsy technicians are licensed embalmers, and that is not, I wouldn't say a requirement, but it is desirable. If they see that you have a background in mortuary science when you apply to a medical examiner's office, you kind of go a little bit higher up that list, and you're more likely to get a call back. But then they took us back into the restorative art rooms, and they showed us all of these like life masks of people that had various deformities, and then they talked about how they would teach us how to sculpt body parts and fix things so that people could be viewed.
That had to be so fascinating.
And
Like, I'm fascinated just like thinking about it. I've also always loved death masks.
Yeah.
I know that's a very different subject, but you brought up life masks.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
Like, I love the artistry of a death mask, and there's something so beautiful.
Well, that was
about
that's
those.
actually one interesting thing about Cypress College is they're probably one of the last mortuary science programs that, like, they still teach that. Like, that's something that you learn how to do. Granted, no one really wants a death mask anymore, but I've
could
been
I?
trained. I've been trained on how to do it.
But if I asked for one, could I get one?
Oh yeah,
And my embalmer or director would assure that it happens?
I mean, I'm capable of doing it. I can't speak for everyone, but
But the
In all-
mortuary...
in all those forms I'm signing, is that a question? Like,
Yeah, with the
hey,
mortuary
that is
facility.
not
Do
a
you want a
question.
death
That is
mask?
not a question. I did actually used to work for a guy though that's kind of a side hustle he had is he would offer that to families.
Oh my
He's like,
God.
do you want plaster? He would do the plaster hand thing a lot of the time because people didn't
Oh, yeah.
didn't want the face. They thought it was kind of creepy.
Yeah,
But he would
understandable.
do the plaster hands like where it
I can
yeah.
totally see that.
Yeah,
That
and
makes
that
a lot of
was
sense.
how he kind of made side money.
I'm
is by
surprised I've never
offering
heard
that.
of that. The hands. I never
Yeah.
heard of that.
Yeah, that was.
I don't think
in-
I've ever seen one. I've even been to the Muter and I didn't see him there.
the hands or the
Yeah,
death mask.
The hand casts.
I don't think they're as like common,
Yeah.
really. I mean, when I think of them, I
They have
kind
tons of death masks there.
Yeah. I've
but-
seen Napoleon's death mask. That was pretty cool. So yeah,
It was short.
Little.
It was a little bitty, maybe.
face.
It was angry and small.
Angry and small.
So yeah, when I am embalming your body that's been mauled by we're on.
Yeah, no,
We're on shots.
We've
Now,
shifted
now,
on
now.
shots.
now I've
So
been
you've
beaten by a fire
You've
hydrant.
been beaten by a fire
Or
hydrant. Okay.
fire extinguisher.
Yeah.
Fire hydrant. That'd be pretty impressive. So anyways,
It's a strong
would that be like American History X style where you bite
Yeah.
it and then they
Yeah.
Oh,
The curb stomp.
They curse.
Oh God.
They fire hydrant stomp you.
That shit fucks me up so bad watching that. I
I
can't
mean,
even
it's the
tell
same.
you.
It's the same thing.
Oh.
Like, both. I had the same reaction to
I would
both
rather.
movies.
I would rather get my head bashed in with a fire extinguisher than get curb stomped. I gotta say, I have things with the teeth. The teeth, like, oh.
Yeah.
Like if you ever needed to get information out of me, all you had to do was come at me with pliers, and I'll tell you everything.
Good to know.
Yeah, so with a crushed skull, we would typically go inside with something called web roll. They're like sheets of cotton.
Okay.
And we would use it to recreate your brain. That's what we typically do on an autopsy because we want to fill that negative space. But in the instance of a crushed skull, it really helps to kind of push the bones forward so they're not collapsed in on themselves. And then that way it kind of gives more of a natural look. And then at that point, we suture you shut, and then we work from the outside. I actually went to a seminar many years ago. There is a man by the name of Vernie Fountain who teaches embalmers. He has a whole academy that you can go to if you're a licensed embalmer.
Did you say Vernie Fountain?
Vernie Fountain.
What a name.
And he teaches you how to actually skin someone's face so that you can go in and wire the bones together or recreate them with plaster of Paris. And then that way you just have to lay the skin back on and it's as good as new. And you don't have to do a lot of topical restoration. So you don't have
makes
to
sense.
use, yeah. And it really, that's ideal because I hate wax. Everybody that works with me knows I hate wax. It's really hard to use. It's hard to cosmetize over. It's unnatural looking.
Cosmetize, I mean, you're applying makeup over.
Applying makeup
Yeah,
over,
right.
yeah. It's like some people try to like color the wax and try to get it to match the skin before they apply it. Some individuals.
What would you use for that? Like an acrylic paint or?
No, just we have like oil-based cosmetics that we use.
Oil-based,
Yeah,
okay,
so
yeah.
we would put the cosmetics into it and kind of mix it in to try to match the skin tone. But the hard part of that is in that sort of instance, they're not going to be a natural skin tone anymore. You're going to hit them really hard with chemicals, and it's going to cause a phenomenon called formaldehyde gray. So when you use formaldehyde on a decedent, especially topically, it can tend to gray out their tissues. So then at that point, you're kind of playing a guessing game on what color were they when they were alive, unless you have a photo.
Yeah. Do you? That was the question I was about to ask you. Have you ever sculpted somebody's face, like looking at a photo of them?
Oh yeah.
I'd imagine that's
In
pretty
that
common.
sort of instance, a photo would be demanded by me.
Okay.
We ask everybody to supply photos. a lot of the times families don't quite understand what that means. Like I got one photo once where the man was in his late 70s. They issued me a photo back when he was in World War II.
like make him look pretty
and
again.
like when he was like a 19-year-old shirtless with 6-pack abs and a full head of hair, just buffed out, standing in front of like a fighter jet. And they're like, make him look like that. And it was black and white, so it wasn't helpful in any way.
Jesus.
And then sometimes you get the people that photocopy their driver's license and then try to blow up that image. And then by the time it gets to me, it's just pixelated
I'd imagine
shit.
that in the
I can't use
world-
it.
I'd imagine that now with everybody having smartphones and like the photography being so easy, that's probably less and less, right?
It still happens. Actually, it's happened a few times this week alone. I got one that was a black and white photo. I received photos that were super old when the person was obviously healthy and weighed probably about 80 pounds heavier than they do now at the time of death. You would think it makes sense. You'd think that people would get it, but they're not always in the most sound frame of mind.
I don't know, like if you're gonna redo me, like when I'm dead,
Do you
like,
wanna-
I want to look like I'm in my 20s versus like now.
Yeah, you are so fucked.
You're pushing it.
I've seen pictures of you in your 20s. It's not happening.
Yeah, I mean, it's embalming. I always use this analogy, especially when I'm training, that embalming is a lot like driving. I mean, there's many different routes I can take to get home. I can take the freeway, I can take side roads, but ultimately you're going to lead to the same place. So there's all sorts of different ways, and the biggest part of my job is problem solving. And that's probably the most fun aspect of it for me, is getting someone that's just messed up.
Have you ever had to reconstruct a burn?
Burn victims, we typically don't.
Yeah.
When someone is burned, it's hard.
I can't imagine that
Just
would work.
think of a piece of chicken that you left too long on the grill, so it gets a nice thick black crust on it, but it's still meat on the inside.
Yeah.
That's what most burn victims look like, and they do smell like chicken too, which is kind of weird because when you get a burn victim and you walk into the mortuary, you're just instantly hungry for barbecue.
It's a fun time. Oh my God.
Yeah.
I didn't expect that to make me feel
Oh,
so
yeah.
weird.
Oh yeah.
Like,
Like
kind
a
of
lot
want to
of-
experience
it-
that, but at the
it's-
same time, it could ruin meat forever.
It's funny
I'm
because
surprised you're not a vegetarian.
a lot of people think that when someone like dies in a car fire or a house fire, that they're just ash. And it's because they don't really understand the chemistry
Nah, they're
behind how
barbecue.
much heat is required to combust a human body. It's insane. I mean,
There's a lot of liquid in there.
there's a lot of stuff to break down. And even with cremation, you're not dust at the ending of it. And that's something that blows people away, is they think that we open that retort, that cremation chamber, and it's just powder. No, you're bone still. It's just your bone. And then from there, we rake your bones out and we put it into an industrial-like blender and pulverize you down to that powder that you
No
actually get.
fucking way.
I remember, okay, so
What?
Didn't know that.
I did not know this either.
So the last time the Dark Art Emporium took place in Midsummer Scream, that happens in the summer in Long Beach, I remember I was working the booth with you, Cross, and a lady came up and was talking to you and mentioned something about the funeral industry. And you pointed at me and was like, oh, that's what she does. And I proceeded to get into this conversation with the woman. She tried to tell me that they have this new technology where they just turn a fan on and it cremates people. The fan cremates people. They don't even
fan
need.
does.
Yeah, and I've learned
no.
I've learned to pick my battles with people, and I'm sure that everybody gets this in their chosen profession in some
Sure.
way, shape, or form, where
Yeah.
you meet people that think that you're the idiot, even though you went to college for this and have the degree and do this, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. But she tried to tell me that, yeah, I didn't know what I was talking about. And I just really wanted to tell her, I'm like, no, lady, you don't know what you're talking about. But I left it. I let it be and let her
then
go
you
on.
went back to work and there was a new fan. And you were like, God damn it!
Now I'm an asshole.
I don't even understand how a
I
fan
just
would
like
do that.
when
but
she
okay.
said that to me, the first thing that went through my mind was just this really huge industrial fan and just like someone like the Mountain from Game of Thrones just hurling the body towards the van, and it just chopping it up into just ground
It's like
beef.
the Nazi from, what is it, Raiders of the Lost Ark? Like it even goes into the propeller.
Oh, yeah.
Just mist.
Pretty much.
Just
that-
fucking mist.
Just meat confetti everywhere in the room, and then you
That
have
sounds way better than burning and blending. It makes much more sense.
I mean, I believe it was Governor Jerry Brown. He did sign into law a new form of disposition, which most people don't know about. And it's called alkaline hydrolysis, but we refer to it as water cremation for families.
That's my favorite black metal band.
Alkaline hydrolysis.
Yeah, they're
So
brutal.
metal.
So brutal. So what is that again? How does that work?
So alkaline hydrolysis or water cremation is basically that. I think of it like the dip from Who Framed Roger Rabbit, where it's a liquid that you put the body into. So you put them into this chamber that's filled with this liquid that will dissolve all the soft tissue, and then at that point you just kind of flush it like you would any
I
other
feel like
waste.
the mob perfected that with buckets of lye a long time ago.
Oh yeah. Well, it's now a legal form of disposition in the state
right.
of California, and it's actually much more environmentally conscious. A lot of people are choosing cremation, especially in California, because we're more liberal.
Do you guys remember from Return of the Living Dead, the tar man? Mm-hmm. That I like immediately. I went to that chemical barrel that the tar man came out of. It's like that's how you make a zombie. Like, that's how you end up. You want zombies? That's how you get zombies.
So yeah, alkaline hydrolysis is it's much more environmentally conscious, because while yes, cremation is better than traditional funeral service where you're using formaldehyde,
But you're
and
still emitting stuff.
known carcinogens. Yeah, exactly. You are combusting so much fuel, and you are putting so much CO2 back into the environment when you use
Right.
traditional flame cremation. So if anybody wants to take away anything from this, is start requesting alkaline hydrolysis. I mean, it's still in its infancy. I'm not entirely sure where you would go in California. I don't know what mortuary has invested in them, but heck, if you can find one,
If any
do
state
it.
of the union has it, it's got to be Cali.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
somewhere in here. Yeah.
I mean, my friend Melissa is a mortician down in Austin, Texas, and she actually runs the only carbon neutral funeral home in the state of Texas. And she's a big proponent to water cremation. And that's kind of why I'm piggybacking on this, is because if you really want to do the right thing for the environment, if that's something that's important to you, like,
What about like the natural burial? Like that's
oh yeah,
a
natural
huge
burial is great too.
resurgence
Yeah.
recently.
Yeah, natural burial is great too.
I went to my first cemetery. You know, I'm a big cemetery.
Oh
nut.
yeah, I've been looking at your paintings, and
Yeah.
I'm wondering what you're doing with all that. I can't wait to see what comes out of it.
They're just fun.
I was wondering if you were gonna make another like necropolis. Where
well,
it was-
it started. Not to get sidetracked, but real quick, it started as a study because I was going to do a big cemetery painting based on McDonald's.
Yeah, I saw that one, the like
Yeah,
McDonald's
awesome.
cemetery.
So that's how the cemetery thing started, and then I did the piece, and then this whole COVID thing happened. And just as a thing to do with my family, you know, we would take my kid and his bike, and we were going to find different cemeteries because it was a safe place to go and be out of the house.
Yeah.
And so I was taking more pictures and doing more studies. And anyway, so I went to a one out in Palm Springs. No, not Palm Springs, Yucca. And the desert cemetery. And they had a massive area that was just for natural burial.
Oh yeah, Joshua Tree. Joshua Tree actually has a natural burial site.
I think that's what
yeah,
it was.
possibly. Yeah.
I get confused between Yucca and Joshua Tree.
I don't go down there much. I'm not a hipster.
But it was cool. Like you know, they're still markers, but they're natural. So
Yeah, they're like rocks.
It's like rocks and cactuses and pieces of rotting wood. But you can definitely tell that somebody's buried in that space. But there's no name or nothing like that. And
I've read of some natural burial sites that utilize GPS, where they just basically give you the GPS coordinates of where they're buried, so they don't actually use anything like that.
I didn't realize GPS was accurate down to like the foot. I guess that makes sense. It
Yeah.
would be. Why not?
It is like the virtual tours we do here.
Yeah.
Like you set the camera 5 feet away from the next one and it finds it.
It knows exactly.
I mean,
Yeah,
I
it
would
knows
suppose
exactly
it's
where it
just
is.
like any Google map system where like you could drop a pin somewhere and be like, okay, this is where we buried Grandpa. These are the latitude and longitude
Right.
coordinates.
Yeah. Down to whatever decimal point you need
Yeah.
to get it to within feet. Yeah,
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Yeah.
All right.
What
So
about
really, you don't have to be buried in a natural burial site in order to have a natural burial. And that's another misconception, is a lot of people think that traditional cemeteries won't allow you to implement any sort of natural burial elements. Oh, absolutely. You know,
All right.
I mean, the Jews have been doing it for centuries. The Jews don't embalm. They don't use any metals. Like and really that's just pine wood box straight into the ground so you can dissolve back into it.
I've always noticed that they have their own sections in the cemetery. Like
Yeah.
they're always sequestered.
Yeah.
Is that them doing it, or is it the cemetery doing it? Do you know?
I mean, it might be a little
it a
bit of
racist
both.
thing? Like
It's
I-
not.
Like,
It's
I
not
really
an
don't know.
anti-Semitic thing
Yeah?
at all.
All
No.
right.
I mean, if you go to a lot of cemeteries, like if you go to Evergreen, the oldest cemetery in Los Angeles County,
Been
you'll
there.
see.
It's
yeah,
rad as hell.
Yeah, I love the back with all the circus performers. That's my
yeah.
favorite. That's my favorite spot. You should also go to the indigent dead site where they have the mass graves. That's
We'll
really
talk about
cool.
this.
Yeah.
We'll talk about this afterwards.
So, yeah, if you go in there, you'll see like there's a section for Chinese, there's a section for the Jewish, there's a section for veterans.
Yeah, the older the cemetery, the more segregated it is, which obviously makes sense.
Well,
but
I mean, I'm fascinated in cemeteries too. In fact, when I met Jeremy Schott, I was running an Instagram page called De-stigmatizing, where in my spare time, I would research decedents, and I really looked for just like the common man that had an interesting story. I wasn't necessarily interested in going to the Marilyn Monroe grave sites of the world. Like, I wanted to find people that really no one knew anything about, but they had a really cool story. And I would do all of this research during my lunch break at work and on my days off. And then I would go to cemeteries and take photos of myself with the grave. And originally this all kind of started because I wanted to just see how many people's graves I could visit in my lifetime to create maybe some form of a scrapbook. But
I
there
feel
was
like
a point.
That's an awesome project.
Oh yeah, and you know, it was something that I was really surprised that people liked.
Yeah, it was a cool Instagram.
It was cool, and
it was really neat.
I think the thing that was disheartening for me is that I knew that people weren't reading what I was writing.
They were just looking at the
They were
image.
just kind of like, oh my God, grave, cool, click it. And then death kind of became this industry of cool. And maybe this makes me like a hipster to say, but like when that started happening and people were just liking it because of the image of it rather than someone like me who's devoted their whole entire life to learning this sort of stuff, it just made it less attractive to me. And there was a big period of my life where I was just like, I don't want to deal with that anymore.
See, I don't know that I see the appreciation and popularization of cemeteries and cemetery culture as a bad thing.
Yeah, I
mean, because I love, like growing up, I've always gone to cemeteries my entire life. Like, I grew up running into cemeteries to hide from kids that were trying to beat me up, like in like 5th, 6th grade. Like, that was my first experience in the cemeteries, was safety. So they've always been places I'm attracted to. So now, like, finding people that are doing, like, there's a group that does picnics in cemeteries around LA. I've actually run into them at a couple of different cemeteries, and they have these picnic parties. This was pre-COVID, but they'd have these big picnic parties that are very respectful of the sites, and like, I loved that. And then like here we have the Historical Society that does like the cemetery tours that talks about like you were talking about, like the layman's or the local people that were important to the community in the cemetery. I don't know. I think that anything that takes a little bit of the mystery away and the fear.
Yeah,
more
exactly.
importantly.
Yeah, educate them so they're not
Yeah.
as fearful about it. I mean,
I'm all for it. But yeah, fuck hipsters. Go ahead.
but anyways, going back to segregation. So one of the things I learned in doing that is that, cemeteries used to be segregated just like schools were.
Sure.
Where they didn't allow black people in their cemeteries. And probably the best story about that is Hattie McDaniel.
Oh yeah.
So Hattie McDaniel was Mammy in Gone with the Wind.
She's in not Forest Lawn. She's in Hollywood Forever now.
She is not in Hollywood Forever.
They have a monument for her there.
They have a monument for her
Okay.
because when Hattie McDaniel died, Hollywood Forever was still practicing segregation, and they did not
shit.
allow black people to be buried in their cemetery. And so she's actually buried at Angeles Rosedale in Los Angeles, because that was like the black cemetery at the time. And when Hollywood Forever came under new ownership, and obviously the segregation was lifted and no one practiced that anymore, the new owner of Hollywood Forever tried to right that wrong and say, hey, we'll pay for the disinterment to move her to where she really wanted to be. And when he reached out to the family was just like, we don't want to disturb her. Leave her where she is. Yeah. And that's why there's that monument to her at Hollywood Forever. It's basically Hollywood Forever trying to right the wrong that the previous owners had made.
That's nice.
Yeah.
I love that cemetery. I actually tried to go there weekend before last, but they weren't allowing you in unless you were a worker, or you could tell people who you were there to visit and they were a family member.
Yeah.
And I was really, really bummed. And I was like, wait a minute. What safer place could I possibly be during this shit than amongst a bunch of buried dead people? And the guy responded, he's like, well, I'm not dead. The guy that was working the
Yeah,
gate.
That's a pretty good
exactly.
answer.
And I was like,
Because there's people
all right,
like
fuck
me.
you, I'm out. All right, fine, whatever.
There's
But
people like me. In fact, when all of this COVID-19 started popping off, Rose Hills Memorial Park, which is the biggest memorial park in North America, they closed their doors. They said no more visitors. We're not allowing funerals anymore. They made big announcements, and they said, look, if you have someone buried here, like, this is the day we're locking the gates. Come and pick up your decorations on the grave, or decorate the grave, or do what you want to do, but this is your cutoff. And for the most part, people were understanding.
yeah.
But you get those families that are just like, how am I going to get anyone sick? And it's like, well, there's living people that are working there. There's people like me that are working there that they're trying to keep safe. And so I'm appreciative of the people that aren't being assholes and, putting my life in jeopardy. But for the people that are being assholes, like, this is not something that we're doing maliciously. This is something that we're doing to try to protect everybody, because there was supposed to be a big Chinese celebration recently. I think it's
New
called
Year.
like Qingming. I'm not Asian, so I don't understand. But people can't see me, and what if people have
Fucking
never come?
It's
But
true.
but
true, they don't know.
Rose Hills was going to have one of those celebrations, and they had to cancel it. So that's just another instance. Is a lot of, luckily, memorial parks and cemeteries have gone the way of trying to bring more people in to kind of congregate with the dead. That was the original Victorian purpose of a cemetery.
I love the old photographs. I have
Oh,
so
yeah.
many from my collection that the people used to just hang out.
Oh yeah,
Photo shoots were very common in cemeteries.
Victorian mourning is
Oh, God,
just
it's
incredible. It's incredible. It's elaborate. It kind of was the precursor to a lot of the practices that we still utilize today. And I always tell people, death is everywhere.
There's a lot of myths and bullshit about that too.
There's a lot of myths, yeah. There's a lot of myths and bullshit, but there are things that we still do today that people just going about their ordinary lives would never know that it once upon a time originated because of death care.
Yeah.
So
Which Death Care is my favorite dark emo band.
do I need
were-
to bust out my list of band names? Because with this whole being stuck inside with my boyfriend and getting high with him every night, I've been coming up with a great list.
I think Death Care is pretty great.
Death Care was really good, but then when Johnny Death Care left the band, they kind of sold out a little bit.
Right? Johnny Death Care.
Back on topic.
Yeah, so here's where I'm headed now, because you touched on it by naming them the way you did. What's the difference between a cemetery and a memorial park?
Okay, so this is pretty interesting. This is something that a lot of people don't know, but there actually is a difference.
I didn't know.
So if you go someplace and it has upright headstones, that's a cemetery. If you go to a park that has just nothing but flush to the ground headstones, that is a memorial park.
So fuck memorial parks. Got
Fuck memorial parks. And it actually was, I call it the F word. Most people refer to it as Forest Lawn. Forest Lawn is one of the big corporate funeral homes in Southern California. It just dominates. But their creator, Hubert Eaton, was actually the kind
Why
of
do these
create.
people always have the weirdest names?
Hubert Eaton, he actually kind of created the concept of memorial parks. So if you go to most forest lawn locations, they don't have upright headstones. The only forest lawn location that actually has upright headstones is the Glendale location, because
Right.
that was the original location. And there is a small portion down by the Great Mausoleum that has all upright headstones, and that was pre-Hubert Eaton. So when Hubert Eaton became involved, he had this image of making cemeteries more hospitable. So Hubert Eaton, his idea was he wanted to make cemeteries less depressing. He wanted them to be places where you could go and just have a picnic and hang out with your family. He wanted them to be just like parks.
But upright tombstones got in the fucking way of that?
Exactly. And
Dumb.
so that's why he wanted it to basically be something that you could look at and not even know that it's inhabited by a bunch of dead people.
I hate him.
Exactly. And that's kind of, I mean, forest lawn in Southern California was one of the big precursors to how we sanitize death. I mean, I think their statues, they're like recreations of like Michelangelo sculptures is pretty cool. But other than that, they're boring.
Yeah.
They're boring. And what's ironic to me is Hubert Eaton wanted Forest Lawn to be a place where people could come and hang out and just experience life. But if you ever try to go to a forest lawn to like grave hunt, to like look for people's
Yeah, they're
graves,
not receptive.
they are not receptive.
Yeah, I've
if
been-
they know
yeah.
that you're there to just kind of hang out, oh, they'll kick you out.
Yep.
They will follow you around. They will ban you. I've been to forest lawns just to find people's graves that aren't my relatives but had an interesting story for my former Instagram. And they would follow me.
Yeah.
They would follow me, and I would have to pretend to be crying on someone's grave to get them to go away.
That's one of the things I really love about Hollywood Forever is like, of all the cemeteries that maybe they should be weird about, or like the Westwood Mall one, where Marilyn is, and
Pierce Brothers Westwood, yeah.
yeah, like of all the, like, those are some of the most open cemeteries in Los Angeles County, but they have the most famous people there.
Oh yeah, Pierce Brothers Westwood. I mean, first off,
I love that little tiny cemetery. It's
I just
so
have to
fucking
say
small.
that before I ever went there, I was reading reviews on how to get there, and people
It's
were
so
talking
hard to find.
Exactly, and that's what
It's
people
in
were
an alley.
saying. And my first thought was like, these people are idiots. How can you not find a cemetery? And then I went there, and the only reason it was easy for me to find is because I recognized the dignity symbol of that green tree flowering.
Oh yeah.
That's a SCI, or a Service Corporation International. They're a big conglomerate that's kind of destroying the funeral industry, but I'll save my opinions about them to myself. But I recognized that tree, and I was like, wait, it's here? And you drive in, and it's just surrounded by these skyscrapers, and it's it's so little, but it's so densely packed with just the most famous people.
And there's a lot of unmarked graves there that are very famous.
Yeah, Roy Orbison, Frank Zappa, both
Yeah.
of them are buried there, and their graves aren't marked. But
Dean
yeah.
Martin's really hard to find. Like, you'd think you'd have a big memorial there,
Yeah.
but like, it's
I
just
mean-
a little plaque on a wall.
Yeah, I mean, Farrah Fawcett, Natalie Wood.
Now, to be fair, Farrah Fawcett has a pretty big.
She
stone there.
does, yeah. I would say the one that was actually pretty difficult to find for me was Betty Page.
Oh, I had a hard
Betty
time
Page
finding her
was
too.
pretty hard to find.
Yeah, but I did find her eventually. Yeah, but it took me a while.
Yeah.
It's all
I was
right.
really shocked.
My kid was riding his bike around the thing the whole time while I was hunting for, so it was good. So, all right, so Memorial Park and Cemetery,
Yeah.
got it. Now, what makes what you do rewarding to you emotionally?
Well, for the most part, I refer to myself as the Wizard of Oz of the mortuary.
Behind the curtain.
I am behind the curtain. Most people don't even know I exist. When I tell people what I do, they think that my job only entails putting makeup and curling old ladies' hair. But there's so much more that goes into it. And I would say the rewarding thing is like when someone actually acknowledges what I did for them. I mean,
So give me an example.
I recently met with a family. The man's wife was dying, and he was searching. So he was shopping around prior to her death to figure out where he wanted to go. And he came in, and him and his daughter sat down with me, and I talked to them. and I gave them a quote for what our prices would be, and then they left. And he came back later in the day and he goes, okay, we're going with you.
Was that a very pragmatic conversation, or was it really emotionally charged?
Oh, it was very pragmatic.
I figured that,
Yeah.
but that seems
Oh, yeah. I mean,
counterintuitive.
but I would also say this was an individual, like this was a man of science. This was an individual that had a doctorate in astrophysics and has written several books.
Okay.
But one of the reasons that he told me that he chose me is that I didn't talk down to him, and I didn't try to sanitize it by using these buzzwords that you'll occasionally hear funeral directors use, like loved one and they passed on, or my least favorite, which you find a lot in hospitals, expired, like a dead body is a fucking gallon of milk. And he told me that he liked that I used the word death. And that one of the issues he had with a lot of places that he went is that people that worked in the death care industry were so uncomfortable with just saying the word death, like it would freak them out.
So just working with somebody that gets it.
He got it.
Gets what you were doing.
I mean, there's a little bit more to it on top of that. He just had this conversation with me about how he really appreciated that I took the time to do what I did, to sit down, like even if it didn't mean that I was guaranteed the, sale.
Right.
And basically getting that trust was very important. But on top of that, he invited me into his home. So he was elderly, he couldn't drive anymore, so he was dependent on his daughter to drive him everywhere. And so when his wife was cremated and it was time to release the cremated remains to him, and I called him, he was like, well, I don't have my daughter around today. And I was like, you know what? You live down the street. I'm just going to drive it to your house. Is that cool? And he goes, okay, great. So I did everything for him in-house. I did all of the actual funeral arrangements at his house. And just being brought into the man's house, and he took me on a tour. And then at the ending of it, he actually gave me one of his books. And then after that, he wrote a 3-page letter to my boss to just express how great I was, that he really appreciated everything that I did for him, and that I was willing to take those extra steps to come to him to make him more comfortable and make the process easier on him. And it's when you get people like that realize that funeral directors and people in death care sacrifice so much. I mean, death doesn't conform to a 9-to-5. We're a job where most funeral directors are on call 24/7. If you're calling a funeral home at 3:00 in the morning, you're getting a real person. You're not getting an answering machine. You're not getting pushed off. You're getting a real person. There are people always working. I mean, there are some facilities where they have embalmers that work around the clock 24/7, where if you drive by that mortuary, there's an embalmer in that mortuary getting people ready. And so when you meet people that aren't creeped out by you and don't take this stereotypical approach thinking that you're just in it for the money and you're trying to screw them over, and you're seen as a human being that just cares about people, it's the best part of the job.
I can imagine that the feeling of opportunism or opportunistic, I would imagine a lot of people probably are mixing up their emotions and projecting and doing all kinds of fucked up shit to make you feel weird about what you're doing.
I would probably say the worst. So early on in my career, before I was even licensed as an embalmer, I was still a student. I was working for a mortuary, and I started conducting veterans funerals. So they put me on all the veterans funerals. And we got this one family that was just hostile from the start. They didn't want to hear anything from you. They didn't want to know anything about you. Just even the most common pleasantries, like trying to introduce yourself, would be met with just hostile behavior. And it's people like that kind of, I mean, I pity them. I pity them that they think that we're monsters in that sense, that
right.
We're trying to take advantage of them and they've got to put up these huge walls. It's what an awful life that must live, to just be so terrified of death and what I represent, that's how you treat another person that's just trying to be kind to you.
There's a pretty fair amount of media that feeds that, though.
Oh yeah, definitely. And that's why, I think the best thing about the whole natural burial and green funeral movement that's happening is getting people back involved with death.
Funeral directors being depicted as villains is kind of a cliche.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And Granted, this isn't to say that those rotten apples don't exist.
Of course, in the industry.
They do. You know, I mean, our local cemetery is known for one that embezzled, what, billions of dollars from the endowment care fund and ended up going to prison for it.
One of my favorite cemeteries is in my backyard. It's Sunnyside, and it's got a long history of corruption and bad shit, but it's in good hands now.
Yeah.
So. Okay, so we talked about the most rewarding.
Yeah.
We talked about the most rewarding day, and it was a very interpersonal thing. It was human. It was a humanity.
I mean,
moment,
even
human moment.
Like another instance that just pops into my head is I remember we had this lady who was just in really bad shape, and I remember doing this reconstruction, and you know the individual was in their casket, and for me, I mean, I spend so much time staring at these bodies, and I'm sure as an artist, like you can probably understand this, where you stare at it for so long that just it starts to bother you. Like everything looks wrong, it doesn't look good enough, it doesn't look right, and you just kind of have to step away from it for a while, or you have to have another new set of eyes come look at it for you to really appreciate what you did.
Right.
And so it was one of these cases, and I felt like she looked awful. I felt like I could have done better, like she didn't look natural enough. And I put her in her casket, and I pushed her up to the front of the chapel, and the daughter came in, and she goes to the double doors to start entering the chapel, and she goes, "I can't go in there alone. Can you come with me?" And I go, "Sure." So she like interlocks arms with me and kind of starts, I have to walk her down the aisle like I'm her father giving her away at a wedding. And she gets halfway down the aisle, is able to see her mother, and she just falls to her knees crying. And at that point, I'm standing there like, okay, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Did I do good or did I do bad? And she gets up and proceeds to run to the casket and just goes, "My mother looks so good." And so it's things like that where people really appreciate what you've done for them. But moving on from that.
That's
really beautiful.
Yeah, it is.
That's a beautiful
Like,
moment.
there's no way you walk away from that feeling anything other than appreciated.
And it's funny because, like, every time you get to a point as an embalmer in the industry where you're just like, fuck it. Like, everybody thinks I'm a crook. No one understands. No one wants to listen to me. No one wants to relate to me. Everybody thinks I'm a weirdo. And it's making me question my own life decisions. Like, maybe I really am a weirdo. Maybe this is something I should walk away from. Something like that will happen. And you'll be like, okay, I made the right decision.
On that note, let's switch gears.
Okay.
Now let's talk about the worst.
Well, I will say there's actually an interesting phenomenon where whenever you get someone that's like pristine, they embalm beautifully, they have beautiful color, you don't have to use any makeup on them, those are the families that will show up and be like, they look like shit. And they'll just complain all the way up through the management chain to try to get you fired. It's the families that have the shittiest looking bodies that just come in the most decrepit forms that will come in and be like, oh wow, they look great. And when you put them out on the floor initially, you're just like, they look like shit.
There's a way that makes sense, though.
Yeah.
Because if there's nothing wrong with them, they really do expect them to look identical to when they die.
Oh yeah.
But if they really fucked up, then like anything that resembles what they looked like in life, like they are fucking thankful as hell.
And you get both type of families too. Like you get the type of families that come in and think that they can leave their loved one unembalmed for a year in your cooler and then decide after that year to come back and have full traditional services and that their relative is gonna look like they did on the day that they died. And then you have the families that think that they died 2 hours ago and they're already like sloughing off their skin and bloated and green.
Right.
So you get both of those extremes. And I will say as far as, difficult cases and challenges as far as restoration.
Don't say cases, you can't say cases.
Okay, JK. I don't think that's ever been a problem for me. There's never been a time where I've dealt with a case where I'm just like, screw this, and walked away.
Well, I wouldn't expect you to. You're very professional.
Yeah.
But like the one that was the most challenging, the one that really pushed your limits. Like we're looking for that.
Well, I will say there was nothing I could
bizarre
do. I mean,
death
there was nothing
that
I could do
was
for
really
this individual.
hard. Yeah.
We didn't end up actually doing any reconstruction. I once received the body, I'm using air quotes here, of someone who died in a mid-air plane collision.
So it wasn't a full body.
Oh, it was just, you couldn't tell which way it was up, which way it was down. That was someone that we don't even bother. It was beyond repair. I would have had to reconstruct everything from the forehead down to the pinky toe. So that was someone that went straight to cremation.
Is that easier? I mean, I realize that you have to protect yourself emotionally from connecting with a body or deceased, or however you want to refer to them. But is it easier when they're so far gone that it's unrecognizable as a human?
Yeah, I would definitely say so. Like, it's easier to just kind of dehumanize them and just look at them for what they are. I mean, we are heaping piles of meat. Like, that's all we are.
Yep.
I mean, we like to think that we're above everything in the animal kingdom, but we're really not. You know, you get another animal in here that's much more bigger and powerful than us, and we're toast. And I mean, that's kind of the fun thing about biology for me, you know, the humble aspect of it, the humbling that biology can have on the human. Yeah. It's pretty deep shit.
Go COVID.
Go COVID.
Oh,
So-
was that the segue?
So now, in the circumstances we're in, like, you're dealing with COVID.
I am, and I just want to say this, and I think that my friend probably put it best in saying that the reason why people like me that work in death care, we refer to ourselves as the last responders right now, because there's a big debate on what's a first responder. I mean, my friend saw individuals arguing in a comment section on Instagram about how grocery workers should be considered first responders. Essentially, yes.
It's just a buzzword right now.
Exactly.
It's not that they're not essential, because they absolutely are, but are they first responders? No.
No.
Let's reserve that for the
Exactly.
people that actually are.
And my one friend, Melissa, made a comment. She said, of course, people don't want to stand on their balconies at 7 p.m. and applaud for us, because when you applaud for a funeral director or an autopsy tech or, you know, a medical examiner, it means that things didn't go as planned.
Sure.
You know, there's a hope that comes with applauding for a nurse or a doctor, because there's this belief that they are going to make people well and bring them back, and everything's going to be fine again. But that's not the reality of our healthcare system. I mean, hundreds of people every single day are dying in hospitals. Nurses and doctors are not gods. They're humans. They're fallible. And so there's been a big debate about, you know, essential workers and first responders, but really no one recognizes a person like me. You know, they don't really see value in what I do, but if there were no funeral directors, if there were no deputy coroners, if there were no medical examiners, think of all of the bodies that would just be piling up in the streets right now. And that was actually—
Bring out your dead!
Bring out your dead.
Bring out your— I'm not dead yet!
And you know, that actually, unfortunately, was a reality in Italy.
Right?
That was a reality. That happened
Like,
in
I
Italy.
make jokes, but it's sad and it's gross.
You know, people hate us until they need us.
Yeah.
They hate us until they need us. And so if you're someone out there listening, like, give it up for the fucking last responders, because we are putting up with just as much shit as the nurses and the doctors are right now.
You are in a similar amount of danger, I would assume.
Oh, absolutely. And this goes back to the idea that, you know, dead bodies can be dangerous. I mean, there is a popular mortician that tries to sell the idea that you can't catch anything from a dead body. Absolutely, you can. You know, diseases don't always die.
Sounds like you're trashing somebody.
Oh, I mean,
I know.
Shot already knows, and
I
I'm
know
not
who
going
it
to
is,
say
too.
the individual's name, because there are so many other people out in the world doing such a better job educating about death. So I'm not going to even give that person the time of day. But yeah, absolutely. It's very dangerous to tell people you can't catch these things, because you can. I mean, with the COVID cases, it's been said, I mean, first off, we don't know a lot. Like, we're learning every single day by what the epidemiologists are doing, learning about this virus, learning about how long it can live on surfaces. I saw one thing that came out that said that, you know, if you are moving a decedent, if you're in the process of conducting a removal and you're transferring them onto a gurney, oh, by all means, you're putting pressure on them, and you could cause them to expel it through their mouth, through their nose. So one thing that we've been told to do in the process of conducting removals is to cover the face, to actually put face masks on them. I had to prepare a COVID case a couple weeks ago for cremation, and so I opened up the body bag to make sure the identification was correct, and the decedent had a face mask on. So that's one aspect of, yeah, they can breathe this out. You know, you could just lean on their chest and cause them to spew something out, and then that
let's face it, bodies
leak, bodies purge.
All right, so spinning it back around.
But like, you know, you're dealing with these bodies. Like, are you scared? Are you like?
I will say that.
Like, are you? Like,
I will say that. I will
at,
say that at first, I didn't really take this seriously. I think most,
like a lot of people,
like most Americans, you know, I remember being in my apartment, reading what was happening in Italy, and just thinking to myself, oh, but like, that probably won't happen here. And then I saw this video that a bunch of Italians made, basically being like, we were once at your point, and then 2 weeks later, here we are now, where we're so overwhelmed. And I didn't think that it was gonna get to that point initially. And then I came into work one day, and everything just kind of snowballed, probably mid-March. I remember I was in my biology class, because one segue is I did decide to go back to school. I'm finishing my bachelor's degree in biological science right now with the intent of studying infectious diseases. And this was something that I was interested in way before COVID-19 happened. So I guess now forever I'm gonna have to clarify that this wasn't an event that inspired me to do this. I was already in the process of doing it before COVID-19. But I was in my biology class, and we're all sitting and getting ready to listen to the lecture, and my professor proceeds to pull out her cell phone, and she just has this intuition to look at her emails. And right at that moment, she received an email from the chancellor of the district saying, we're shutting it down. And she put up the projector and she said, grab your shit and go. And we were out of school for a few days. They canceled classes for 2 to 3 days, and then we transitioned to online rather quickly. And then that weekend when I went into work, they had implemented all of these social distancing policies, and we were starting to get all of these messages from the CDC about how to approach this and how to handle these decedents. At that point, to us, we weren't aware that we had anybody at that point in time. We could have very well.
Sure.
But that was when it became a reality, and I kind of started to panic a little bit. My main concern was I have a very limited time frame to make my hours to qualify for my health benefits. And that was my first question is, okay, well, if I'm supposed to come into work, only do my work for the day, the immediate work that needs to be done, and then I have to leave, I'm not gonna make enough hours during the week. Are they really gonna take my health benefits away from me while I'm on the front line getting up close and personal with people that died from this?
Obviously that wasn't a problem because the bodies started flowing.
Yeah, so I think it took about another week or so for our first confirmed COVID death, and I was actually the only embalmer on staff that day when the arranger came to me and said, we have our first COVID person coming.
Tell me what went through your head in that moment. You're facing down a confirmed COVID death.
I mean, it was, okay, this is real. And then I mean, my training kicked in where it's like, we treat every decedent like they're contagious. We always implement personal protective equipment, or at least you should be implementing personal protective and universal precautions whenever you come in contact with a decedent. But that was the reality that, okay, I really have to disinfect. I really have to wear everything. I mean, I posted a picture on my Instagram of wearing the bonnet and everything head to toe. Oh, before COVID-19, I didn't embalm like that. I wore the smock, I wore gloves. I would maybe wear a face shield if it was an autopsy and it was especially messy. But masks, bonnets, shoe covers, I never really wore those things before COVID-19 because gloves and a smock were enough.
So now we are a month and a half from the point where that happened, where you got your first COVID body, how many have you handled?
I mean, once again, I'm uncertain of how many I've actually handled. In fact, I have to go into work tomorrow and I have 2 COVID-19 cases to embalm. So I will be dealing with 2 cases tomorrow. We don't really have real numbers.
Okay, let me ask you another question. Before this started, what was the average body count in your cooler?
I mean,
what was the capacity of it first?
I mean, capacity in our cooler is about 52 to 55 bodies.
Okay, so what was normal before this?
Normal, I mean, I do work for a massive mortuary in Southern California. So our cooler was typically always relatively full. I'd say probably there was always at least like 40 individuals in the cooler at any point in time. But there was space. There was always a shelf available that if in the middle of the night we received a death call, we could bring someone into our care. Now we are at a point where we cannot get people out fast enough. There's been several weeks where families are calling us saying that someone died, and we have to tell them, we don't have the space. Here's the other mortuaries in the area, try them.
What's their luck with that, you think?
You know, I'm not sure. We don't call them back to ask, hey, like, were you able to,
I mean,
did it
obviously.
work out with that mortuary down the street?
I was just thinking maybe you had contacts or associates that maybe gave you feedback on how they're doing as well.
You know, I haven't personally reached out to anyone else at mortuaries around me, but maybe I should now. But as far as the mortuary I work for is concerned, we've had to start turning families away. We don't have enough space. And I mean, how do you tell a person we can't help you? You know, that was something that is incredibly unique to this situation.
Have you had that conversation with somebody yourself?
Fortunately, I have not had to have that conversation because I am a behind the scenes person.
Right.
We have a whole staff of individuals at our mortuary that are the faces of the mortuary that deal directly with the families.
I'm sure that you've talked with them though.
I mean,
not the families, but the people that are dealing with.
Oh yeah,
families.
I mean, I've overheard.
Like how does that? How are they feeling about that?
I mean, I think
Has anybody vented to you? Is what I'm thinking.
I mean, I think the biggest issue is that you get families that think that we're doing this maliciously to them, right? That we're just trying to skirt our responsibilities during this time.
Role, yeah.
And I've listened to conversations that arrangers have had. Granted, I don't hear what's coming in from the other side, but I know it's hostile based off of how the funeral director is responding. But yeah, I mean, this is a unique situation that I've never had to deal with before.
So what I'm hearing from you is that this is a massive hoax, and we should all inject cleanser.
Oh yeah, I mean that's. This country is going to hell. Well, I mean, thinking about hoax and everything. So today, because of the issues that we're having, where we're having to turn families away because we can't get decedents out and buried or cremated fast enough, I was working today to devise a plan to fix this problem. And I was discussing it with my boss, and he proceeds to bring out this stack of death certificates. And he goes, I've been saving a copy of every single death certificate, or a working copy of the death certificate, not the official certified,
right?
But the working copy of the death certificate of every single individual that's come through this mortuary that had COVID-19 listed as a cause of death. And he brings out this probably like 2-inch thick packet of papers and just proceeds to start going through each one with me. And he goes, these are all the people. Some of them I didn't even know had COVID-19, because as an embalmer, we don't always know what someone died from.
Oh,
that's something that sometimes comes later on, and after we've already buried them.
I would assume that you would
or done
know.
the embalming, not buried them, but done the preparations.
I would think you should know.
You should absolutely know. But I told my boss when I saw this, I was like, I really wish that it was legal for me to release this sort of information out into the world, because then maybe people wouldn't think that it was a hoax.
So Laura, I gotta say, I learned so goddamn much. And I'm a cemetery, mortuary nerd. I love this shit.
And we just inserted the tip. You know, just 20% of
Oh
that
my
mortuary
God.
dick.
We'll have to have
We
Laura
didn't
back.
go full DP.
To be fair, that's all I have. But anyway, thank you for being on and for discussing this with us and sharing your livelihood with us and your knowledge. You've been a friend for a long time, and
One of our oldest friends.
Wow. I mean, yeah, it's actually been years.
Four
You
years.
like me?
we loves
You
and
like
appreciates you.
I always thought I was annoying. I always thought
I
you
mean,
just...
Well-
nobody said you weren't. But thanks for being on. And I think a lot of people are really going to be engaged by what you had to say today because there's so much unknown about this industry, about your industry, about what you do, and about the culture behind it. Like I said, I'm a nerd for this shit, and I learned from you today. So
Oh, yeah. I mean, even people that I've met out on the street that initially have this apprehension to want to dig a little bit deeper or get to know me, there's this head shaking, wide-eyed, stepping back motion that they do initially, but then they kind of start to gravitate, and then the floodgates open, and they have all these questions. I mean, fear is really just a lack of education.
There can't be a moment where somebody has been like, oh, what do you do? And you tell them, and they're like, whatever. Like, they don't give a shit. Like,
Yeah.
they have to give a shit because it's interesting. Like, they're at least curious or off-put or scared, or there's a visceral reaction to what you do for a living. There's no way people just blow it off. That's
Yeah.
got to be rewarding in and of itself.
True, yeah.
Yeah.
I blew it off.
You blew it off.
But
I mean,
to be fair,
you're
shot
so-
blows a lot of things.
I was going to say, you're so cool. Like,
Yeah, I'm really cool.
you don't
Fuck
care
yeah,
about
Rick.
anything.
Thanks for being on ARTPIT. Thank
love
you for
you,
being
Laura.
here. We love you, Laura.
Last responders matter.
Last responders matter.
Give us those sweet discounts. Bring us some pizza, Fourth Horseman.